Hi everybody, so in this video we're going to go through the process of running ClimPACT2 on a Linux operating system, and this process is going to be extremely similar for those people using a Mac OS operating system. So the only requirement for you to be able to run ClimPACT2 on your computer is that you have R installed. So here I'm assuming that you've already got R installed. Alright, so the easiest way to get a copy of ClimPACT2 is to download it from the GitHub ClimPACT2 repository, which you can see right here, and I'll put this website address in the comments below this video. So once you're at this page, all you need to do is click the download zip button on the right hand side, and this will download a zip file to your computer. And so this is the page where you can always get the latest version of ClimPACT2. So I've already downloaded ClimPACT2 to my desktop, which you can see here. So when you download that, you get a ClimPACT2 master.zip file. And so the first thing you need to do is just to extract that. So I'll just extract that to my desktop, like so. And then you need to go into that folder. And you can see these are all the files that constitute ClimPACT2. So now the next step is to open a terminal window in the folder where the ClimPACT2 files are. Okay, so we're in the terminal, in the folder where the ClimPACT2 files are, which you can see here. Then we just need to get into R, do that by typing R. And you can see I'm running off R version 3.0.2, and ClimPACT2 requires this version or later in order to run. And so if you go to the R website, the version that they have up at the moment will be later than this. It's 3.2.3, I believe. So when you're viewing this, any version you can download from the, or any latest version you can download from the R website will suffice. Okay, so we're in R, in the folder where the ClimPACT2 files are. All we need to do now is to source the climpact2.gui.r file. That's as easy as typing that out. Now the first time that you run ClimPACT2 by pressing enter here, the ClimPACT2 code will scan your installation of R to determine what R packages you have installed. And if it decides that you're missing some R packages that it needs to run, it'll download and install those. So I'm running off effectively a clean installation of R on this computer. And so when I open up ClimPACT2 now for the first time, it's going to download and install some packages, and that takes a couple of minutes, but this only has to happen once. After that, ClimPACT2 will open straight away. So let's do that. So you can see here it's determined that there are some packages it needs to install, and it's asking me to pick a mirror to download from. And it usually doesn't matter what mirror you choose, but the one that's geographically closest to you is usually quicker. So I'll pick Canberra. And you can see R downloading and installing these packages. And so there are possibly about half a dozen packages that ClimPACT2 needs in order to run. The most fundamental one I'd say is climdex.pkic, this package here. And this was developed by the good folk at the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium. That's what PKIC stands for. And this really forms the foundation of ClimPACT2. And this is one of the big overhauls made in version 2 of ClimPACT. The climdex.pkic code essentially provides a very clean foundation upon which to calculate the indices that we're going to calculate. Okay, so you can see here that R has finished downloading and installing those packages, and the ClimPACT2 window has popped up. So from now on, this window will pop up straight away, and you won't need to install any of those packages. So just to demonstrate, if I exit this straight away, and I type that source climpact2.gui.r command again, then the ClimPACT2 interface will pop up immediately. Okay, so that's really it to getting ClimPACT2 running. It's pretty simple. let's step through running ClimPACT just using some of the sample data that's provided in the zip file that we downloaded. And you can see off this home screen there are two main steps to running ClimPACT2. The first is loading and checking your data for basic quality control issues, and the second is actually calculating the indices. So before we load and check the data, I'll just show you what the input data looks like for ClimPACT2, and this is what your input data has to look like if you want to run ClimPACT2 using your own weather data, which I assume you do. So in the folder where we've downloaded ClimPACT2, you'll see a text file called climpact2.sampledata.1d time series. This is the sample data that we can use in the ClimPACT2 GUI. So opening that up, you see it's just a simple text file made up of 6 columns. And so this represents a daily time series of information at a specific site, for example, a specific weather station. And this time series is daily. Each line in this text file represents one day. And so the left column is the year, the second column is the month, third column is the day of the month, fourth is precipitation, the fifth is maximum daily temperature, and the sixth column is minimum daily temperature. So 6 columns. And in ClimPACT2, negative 99.9 represents a missing value. So if you don't have data for precipitation or temperature for a specific day, you need to use negative 99.9 to tell ClimPACT2 that there is no data on that day. And so, for example, you can see here this record starts in 1931, and there is no precipitation data, I think, for this whole decade. Okay, so we recommend that you use this sample file as a template to model your own input data off. Okay, so let's load this file into ClimPACT2. Okay, you select the Load and Check Data button and you'll get a dialog box to pick your ASCII file to load. I'm just going to select the sample data. And you'll see this dialog box pop up. This just lets you enter some information regarding the calculation of some of the indices. So the first is just the station name. By default it takes the file name of your input file. The second row lets you enter the latitude and longitude of your site. This is actually important. For example, one of the indices requires the latitude in order to estimate the incoming radiation for that site. But for this example, I'm just going to enter anything. The third row is the base period. So a lot of these indices are based on thresholds, and a lot of those thresholds are absolute thresholds. For example, how many days does maximum temperature reach over 40 degrees, for example. That's an example of an absolute threshold, but some of the thresholds are percentile thresholds. For example, how many days of each year exceeds the 90th percentile. And the percentiles are calculated over the base period provided here. So the default is 1971 to 2000, so the percentiles will be calculated over this 30-year period, and all data in your record will be compared to this base period. And so obviously if your data doesn't span over 1971 to 2000, for example, maybe it starts in 1980, then you'll need to change your base period. If my record goes from 1980 to 2010, I'll need to change the beginning of my base period to at least 1980. Okay, and you should have at least 30 years for your base period. Right, the next row lets you set the standard deviations that are used, the number of standard deviations that are used to identify temperature outliers in your input data. So as one of the quality control checks that ClimPACT2 performs, it allows you to change the number of standard deviations that will be used to identify temperature outliers. So for example here the default's 4. That means any temperature value that is greater than 4 standard deviations away from the mean will be flagged as an outlier for you to check. And so we'll just leave that at 4. Under here is a load previous thresholds button. This allows you to load thresholds previously calculated using ClimPACT2. So instead of calculating them again using this base period, you can select this and load previous thresholds. Most of the time you won't need to do this. You'll just calculate your thresholds using or based on a period of time that exists in the record that you've loaded into ClimPACT2. So we'll leave that. And that's basically it for now. So now we just need to press the process and quality control button, and ClimPACT2 will basically crunch those numbers and perform some quality control checks on your data. So an important point to make is that ClimPACT2 won't change any of your data. It checks it for some quality control issues, but it does not modify anything. It's up to the user to look through the quality control information that ClimPACT2 produces and to adjust their input accordingly, but ClimPACT2 won't do any of that for you. So here you'll see a dialog box pop up saying the quality control check was complete. Carefully evaluate output in the following directory for potential issues before continuing. And it says to refer to Appendix F of the ClimPACT manual for guidance on how to interpret the files that have been created in this quality control directory here. And so that'll be the focus of another video, but it's very important for you to realize that you do need to check very carefully your input data for any quality control issues. So we'll just select done. We can select OK here, and we're back to the main menu, and you can see now that step 2 is highlighted green as we've completed step 1. And so you can see actually in our ClimPACT2 folder 5 folders have been created after running step 1. One is for indices. This is where the data for the indices that will be calculated will be stored. One's for plots, the plots of the indices that will be calculated. QC is the quality control information. So if we go in here, and there's a folder for each site that you run ClimPACT2 for, you can see just over a dozen files that give you information about any quality control issues in your input data. Again, refer to Appendix F of the manual, which you get when you download ClimPACT2. Refer to Appendix F for information on all of these files. And then there's a threshold folder which stores the thresholds calculated on the base period that you specified, just for your future reference, as well as some basic trend information that will be calculated when you calculate the indices. So there are 5 folders that are created in total. Alright, so let's go back to ClimPACT2 and let's run step 2 to actually calculate the indices. Okay, when you select that, you get an indices calculation dialog box. You can leave all of these as default, and that won't be a problem at all. These options just refer to several of the indices, and you can change them if you like. The first one is just the title that will be used in each plot. Secondly, you can choose whether you want a monthly or annual time step. So some of the indices can be calculated monthly. And if you select a month, then those indices that can be calculated monthly will be calculated monthly. But we'll just leave that at annual. And here there are some options to specify thresholds for different indices or parameters for different indices, and you can refer to the user manual to see what these exactly mean. And down the bottom here there's even an option for you to create your own index to some extent. But we're going to leave all of this at their default values and just select calculate indices. And so this is a relatively quick process. Okay, calculation completed. The plots are in this folder, it says, and the data are in this folder. Okay, so the plots are in the plots folder and the data are in the indices folder. So if we go to plots, there's a folder for each station that we run ClimPACT2 on. So if we run ClimPACT2 again for different weather stations, for example, there'll be a folder for each one here. So here are all the plots for the indices that ClimPACT2 has just created. So if we just look at one, for example, RX 1 day, this is the maximum 1 day precipitation total. You can see a time series plot for that index. So there's the title and the location, there's the index and the definition of that index in the subtitle. In the plot itself, there's a linear trend line and then a locally weighted smoothing line. Little blue triangles indicate missing data in the index that's calculated. And then there are some basic statistics at the bottom, p-value of the trend line. So you can see here that this trend isn't really significant. Okay, more importantly though, if we go to the indices folder, we can see the corresponding .csv files that are created for each of those indices. So before we're just looking at the JPEG plots that were created, but we can actually look at the actual data that's plotted. So if I go to RX 1 day, it has a CSV file. I'll just open it in my spreadsheet software. You can see that here are the values for each year that get plotted for RX 1 day. And you can see before the time series of data gets plotted, there's just some basic metadata that's also written out. The station name, the latitude, longitude, version of ClimPACT, and the data was calculated on. But so this is really the meat of the results. You can use this data, of course, to plot the indices any way you like. And in this third column, there's the normalized data. So RX 1 day, but normalized, and these are normalized to all of the years available. Okay, but that is essentially it. We have just run ClimPACT2 successfully, just using the sample data.